Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Ella and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Welch, MVP, Director, Applied Information Sciences, USA, who will be talking to you today about Power Platform as a first-class citizen in the cloud transformation and app modernization journey. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC20. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link on the top. The ESPC20 online summer sale has landed. Book a tutorial ticket before August 27th and receive a 2-day conference ticket for absolutely free. Check out our website for more information. After the webinar, we will have a question and answer session. Type any questions you have in the question window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Andrew Welch. Hello, Andrew. How are you today?
I'm well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Great. So I see that you made me a presenter, and if you would confirm when you can see my screen, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, and everyone, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to. I think we planned this back in gosh, maybe May, and I was yeah, so I've just been really excited to do this. So today we're going to talk about Power Platform and how organizations and how you can use Power Platform as part of that cloud transformation journey. And we're going to talk a little bit in terms of theoreticals, but I'll also provide some real concrete examples of how this can be done and how you can architect in the organization to really use Power Platform, but use it across the Microsoft stack. So including resources from SharePoint and Microsoft 365, Teams, Azure, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find a lot of the material at actually powerplatform.af. That'll take you to the GitHub site where the Power Platform Adoption Framework lives. I swear it stands for Adoption Framework. I will also tell you that it was sort of tricky registering a domain in Afghanistan, but it can be done. It can be done. So in any case, without further ado, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Andrew Welch. I am the Director of Cloud Application Strategy at a company called Applied Information Sciences, AIS. We've got folks and clients all across the US, Europe, and India. I personally spend most of my time, COVID pandemic notwithstanding, I spend most of my time in the US, the UK, and Sweden, where much of my family still lives today. In any case, let's connect on Twitter. I'd love to chat with you further about this. I post a lot there on Twitter on this topic, and then my personal website, runwayview.com. I will place the material from this presentation. I'll place all of that there at under the speaking link sometime today. But yeah, runwayview.com is where you can go to get all of this material later on. While we're on the topic of introductions, I will introduce my partners in crime, Lucy Bourne, Lee Baker, Manuela Pichler, and Keith Watling. The 5 of us work on the Power Platform Adoption Framework together. So just really smart folks, at least the other 4 of them. I just do a lot of talking, and you can follow them as well. There's a ton of information that and really good chatter on this topic that you'll get from from all 5 of us. So we'd love to engage with you, and that QR code there is to the adoption framework itself. And when we talk about the adoption framework, it is a real thing. It is community owned, community driven. It is on GitHub. We actually just published last week, we published 7 themes, things that we are working on in the framework for the rest of this year, and have invited community contributions and thoughts and whatever. So please go there, feel free to submit ideas or best practices in the form of issues right there on GitHub. We'd really love to hear from you. While I'm talking about hearing from you, by all means, if you've got questions or comments or whatever, please just drop them in the chat. I'm trying to monitor it, and I will do my best as we go forward here. So today, what we're really hoping to do, my goals are, first and foremost, I want everyone to walk away from this discussion with some ideas of how you can get started, like actually practical ideas, how you can get started, but also how you can extend the platform into what you're doing across the stack. So I do want everyone to walk away with some concrete ideas, but for the most part, what we'll do is we'll kind of overview the current state of the platform and the components and how all of those fit together. We'll talk more about the adoption framework, and then we'll get into best practices. So that's what you can expect today, and hopefully this is kind of along the lines of what you were hoping for. But if you're finding that it's not really a good use of your time, by all means, ask some questions or share some comments in the chat, and I'll do my best. Okay, so first of all, I think it's really important that we talk about what low-code cloud transformation really is. And this is something that I would say that Manuela, who I mentioned earlier, Manuela and I gave the morning keynote at Power Saturday London back in February, back in the days when 500 people could freely gather. And this was where we really kind of introduced and started talking a lot about this idea of low-code cloud transformation and the purpose of the platform in that context. So when we think about it, a lot of business challenges, we solve them with custom software development. We've been doing that for a really long time, particularly in large organizations. But the fact is that there's only so much of that in which we can invest. So for a long time, organizations have turned to COTS products, right? Pre-built, baked solutions that they could deploy. But we've learned over time that there isn't always an app for that, particularly when you're in a very niche industry, where you're doing work in a very unique way. So I spoke to one organization recently that they own real estate for postal facilities. Like, that is their business, are managing facilities dedicated to moving mail. And that's kind of specific, right? So for those sorts of situations, which actually constitute the majority of business problems, and I'll share some numbers with you, that's really what we're here to do. This is the opportunity. This is what no-code and low-code cloud transformation is all about, or these missed opportunities that we want to turn into seized opportunities. So when we look at numbers here, first and foremost, 65% of organizations say that they have an app development backlog, right? That these are things that they can't get to. 37% of organizations, therefore, are using paper processes to do that which they could automate and digitize. So my favorite example of this is my friend Samit, who worked in security at Heathrow Airport. He taught himself Power Apps and began to transform paper processes, and now he's a digital transformation lead or something along those lines, and an expert on Power Platform at Heathrow. 69% of organizations are using platforms like Power Platform to accelerate their transformation as organizations. And my favorite number, and then we'll be done with numbers, I promise, 65% of organizations will be using low-code platforms like Power Platform or 65% of all app development by 2024 will be happening using technology like this. So when we think about all of this, we're thinking about how do we use, and this is why I was really excited about getting together with this group, how do we use all three clouds, Azure, Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and Power Platform, to achieve this idea of modernizing our applications, modernizing our legacy processes, and transforming our organizations in the cloud. And what we'll spend the rest of the next little while talking about, of course, is Power Platform. I come from full disclosure, I come from a Dynamics background. I've been working with Dynamics for about a decade now. And I have historically been absolutely terrible with SharePoint. It's just not been my specialty. So a lot of what I will share is very kind of Dynamics thinking, and it's Dynamics focus and its thinking. But we're going to talk about the whole platform here. One disclaimer that I want to share is that there's been a lot of churn when it comes to Microsoft product naming. So we had a product called CDS, the Common Data Service. Last month at Inspire, it was rebranded as DataFlex Pro, and a new product was introduced, which was called DataFlex for Teams. Yesterday, due to some trademark disputes, the names changed again. So DataFlex Pro went back to being CDS, which we think is a temporary change, and DataFlex for Teams was rebranded Project Oakdale, which I have to say is definitely temporary. They're not keeping that name. I don't know where it goes from here. That's kind of a mystery, but for the moment, this is where we are, CDS and Project Oakdale. So I tried to scrub the material beforehand yesterday to make sure that this naming was consistent, but everyone should just understand that DataFlex Pro and CDS are the same thing, and DataFlex for Teams and Project Oakdale are also the same thing. You may have also heard CDS Lite as another name for DataFlex for Teams and Project Oakdale. So apologies up front. That is Microsoft's issue to resolve, and I'm sure they'll resolve it soon. All right. So when we think about the Microsoft ecosystem, right, around Power Platform, I want to arrange some of the pieces here. So the first thing that we talk about is the data layer. I think data is incredibly important. I always start with data when I think about solutions that we're building. And the first component of that data layer, so think of everything I'm going to introduce in this layer as places you can store your data and services that you can use around your data. So the first are the data connectors. These are out-of-the-box connectors. There's nearly 400 of them that are built into Power Platform that use APIs, the API of the service to which you are connecting to connect to that data source in a repeatable way. So, for example, you can build a Power App that taps into Facebook, for example, as a data source that pulls data and transacts data with Facebook, or almost 400 other things. Next, we've got SharePoint. So SharePoint is kind of the classic data source, right? We've been building SharePoint applications for a very long time, and data on Power Platform can live in SharePoint in the form of a SharePoint list, or now, of course, quote unquote Microsoft lists, which is the new product that's been introduced kind of as standalone SharePoint lists. So data can live there in SharePoint as well. Data can also live in what was DataFlex for Teams for about several weeks, but now is Project Oakdale. So think of Project Oakdale as a light, but nonetheless relational data service that lives inside of Teams. And I'm happy to take questions on that. I've been working with the Microsoft product group on this topic. So if there's any questions about that, please share, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Then we have the Common Data Service. The Common Data Service is the native data service to Power Platform, but part of what we've been trying to do with the DataFlex transition, right, is to extend that data service across the entire Microsoft stack. And then finally, we have Azure SQL. So we can store our data in Azure and then tap into it. So that's the data layer. And as we move from left to right along the spectrum, generally we're introducing additional complexity, but also introducing additional capability. So that's not absolute here, but that's a good way to think about it, to kind of think about on the scale of data sources. So next we go up to this extensibility layer. This is really what Power Platform is. These are the applications, Power BI for business intelligence and data visualization, beautiful dashboards surfacing that data. Power Automate for business process automation and RPA, robotic process automation. So that happens in Power Automate. Power Virtual Agents for building intelligent chatbots, Canvas Power Apps, model-driven and Power Apps portals, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then finally, AI Builder for low-code AI. And then we move on to the product layer. So the product layer, think of the product layer as products built atop this entire stack. That includes very obviously Microsoft 365. So 365 uses Power Automate. 365 pulls in, say, Canvas apps that you build atop SharePoint lists, etc. The next are services in Azure that we can use to further extend the capabilities of the platform, as well as Dynamics 365. So this is really important. The Dynamics applications really are just Power Apps. They're first-party Power Apps that Microsoft happens to have built. And then finally, third-party business applications that you might be using. Now, one of the questions that we get a lot is, where does CDS fit into this overall landscape, and why would I use it, particularly when it comes to the license costs, right? So CDS is the most expensive of those data sources. It is true. This is why. So Common Data Service introduces a number of services are dependent on Common Data Service. So as you look at that, first and foremost, Dynamics requires Common Data Service, AI Builder requires Common Data Service, and some of your Power Apps, model-driven Power Apps, as well as Power Apps portals. So if you want to extend or expose your data to external users, say you want to build a portal for customers to log on and see all of their data, for example, or think about like you log into your bank account or whatever it might be, that portal capability relies on CDS as well. The Dynamics 365 applications, mobile offline, and these are just some of my favorites. Virtual entities, the ability to point your applications through CDS at other data sources. The common data model, so this is a data model that is deployed as part of CDS that helps us standardize where data is kept and what data looks like across organizations. The ability to create business process logic in the data service, right? So business process flows and calculations and rollups and extending that with third-party APIs. Data management tools like data flows. Data flows are a low-code way to integrate and move data from one source to the other. Export services, the ability to export lots of data to an Azure data lake, API access, etc. Security controls, so granular security roles, even field level security, the ability to control security across teams and business units, auditing of changes in the data itself, hierarchical security, and then sharing of individual records. A mature application lifecycle, so the ability to create solutions and move those solutions through an automated deployment pipeline in Azure DevOps. Those are dependent on CDS as well. And then a really extensive third-party ecosystem. So the XRM Toolbox tooling, which is just excellent. And then Microsoft ISVs, companies, software vendors that have built solutions on top of the platform itself. So this is why if you need these types of services, these are why you might want to be considering the Common Data Service as the place to store your data, because these services are generally dependent on CDS itself. So when we look at Power Platform in the broader context, and this is important as well because we're really adopting the platform across large organizations and that frequently have an investment in other Microsoft technology. So we've got the Common Data Service with the Power Platform components, our different types of Power Apps here. We also have SharePoint that fits in here too, so you can build mobile applications, Canvas applications on top of, say, SharePoint lists as your data source. Other things live in SharePoint as well. Obviously all of your Office 365 applications. This sets us up for a spectrum really of app development where you've got quote unquote citizen developers who are building these localized productivity applications. They might be using Excel, they might be using SharePoint, Canvas apps, and then to kind of along the spectrum to these more enterprise grade applications that really need some of those capabilities that live in common data service that I mentioned earlier. So I work with one Fortune 100 organization that they are moving $2 billion worth of business through a single CDS and Power Platform solution every year. So those are these really mission critical applications for them. And then finally, Teams kind of lives on top of all of this. All of this data you can surface through Teams, automate with Power Automate, and it all lives inside of Azure. So we can scale it almost infinitely, subject to capacity controls and licensing and that type of thing, but we can scale and extend across the entirety of the platform. I've mentioned Teams a lot, and there's been a ton of change recently when it comes to Teams, the integration between Teams and Power Platform. So for those who are not up on this, we can actually deliver Power Apps and Power BI components through Teams. I mentioned that earlier, just a moment ago. We can create automation, say approval flows, right? So someone requests time off, or they make a budget request, or they make a travel request, or whatever it might be. We can actually route the approval of that directly through a chat in Teams. So the manager gets a kind of the request and a button, approve, deny, reasons, whatever. We can do all that in Teams. We can build chatbots in Power Virtual Agents that converse with users right there inside of Teams. And then Power Apps built directly in Teams, we can actually use it, well, as of September, when this becomes generally available, this capability, and this is a mention of DataFlex, I apologize, it should be Project Oakdale. We can actually build Power Apps right directly inside of Teams. And then there's an ALM story as well, right? So this is really important for everyone to know, is that if you build the solution inside of Teams, inside of Project Oakdale, we'll be able to promote that solution to the common data service if your needs evolve such that you need that more extended data service capability. So we don't have to re-architect the app. We can just move the app right along, right along a maturity spectrum. And we'll talk about that maturity spectrum, that environmental architecture here in a few moments. So that's integration with Teams. I do not see any messages in the chat window. So normally I would stop and I'd answer some questions here, but and apologies, every few moments I have a sip of coffee here. All right, so let's press on. When I talk with organizations and I talk with folks about adopting Power Platform, I really remind them that this is a coherent journey, right? This isn't just something that you do and then you walk away from. Part of the value of the platform, just like is the value of other components of the Microsoft stack, Azure, SharePoint, 365, et cetera, is that you continue to evolve and mature the platform, but you also continue to migrate workloads or use cases or solutions or business processes, whatever you want to call it, you continue to migrate those workloads onto the platform over time. So it's something that grows in value, but it's not like an implementation. It's not like we're going to start it and then several months from now we'll finish it and we'll be done with it. So we created, and when I say we, I mean the 5 that I introduced earlier with a lot of help from the community. We created this Power Platform adoption framework because what we saw was that these mature organizations, I'm talking about the real mature early adopters, Heathrow Airport, Virgin Atlantic, Schlumberger, the French and the Swiss National Railways, Liberty Mutual insurance company in Boston. These adopters have determined, right, that you really need this rigor, discipline, and best practices. Those folks who go way back with SharePoint will probably remember when, maybe 10 years ago, right, when governance of SharePoint was kind of a mess, right, and there wasn't a lot of control and there wasn't a lot of ability for IT organizations to have a great handle on what was happening in their data. That is obviously maybe more important in some parts of the world, depending on how eager the government is to have access to your data. But certainly for the crowd on this call, maybe no more important than in Europe. So we created the framework to help organizations get to value quickly. The days of IT, of software development projects spending 6 months to generate a bunch of documents are over. If you can't get your first solution, your first applications built in a matter of weeks or less, you're actually doing it wrong. Educating and training and growing your community of citizen developers. So I can't overstate enough how important it is to educate and involve your citizen developers early in the process. Create durable partnerships between business, IT, and the community. A lot of times we see the interest and the enthusiasm for Power Platform coming from business groups, not necessarily from IT. We also look at continuously improving the return on investment. So if you come from an Azure background, you're very used to probably the consumption model, right? Where fundamentally the more you use, the more you pay. Well, with Power Platform is licensing based. So in general, if you are if you're buying a license, and I think let's just say it's I forget exactly what it is, something like 35 euro, 31 pounds, something like that, $40 per user per month for a certain Power Apps license, right? And you're only using one application or one workload on the platform, then the cost of that license equals, or the cost of that workload equals the cost of that license. But if you introduce 2 workloads, you've divided it in half. If you introduce 100 workloads, you've divided it. You're starting to get down to much less than the price of a cup of coffee in order for your users to use that application. So we actually benefit when we migrate more to the platform. And then finally, this idea that through disciplined enterprise management, we can actually create really big line of business tier 1 solutions and workloads here on the platform. So in short, the framework is how we adopt at scale. So let's look at what is inside of the framework. What can you expect when you go and you start using this? So first and foremost, it's kind of a fitting together of all of the pieces. How does Power Platform, Azure, and Microsoft 365, how do they fit together? Guidance on how to adopt at scale, how to get started, what the ongoing work streams are around the platform, how to manage and govern the platform, and this includes the Microsoft Center of Excellence model, as well as the environmental architecture model that we created for the framework. And then finally, best practices for how to nurture the community, both your citizen developers, so your accountants and your bus drivers who are out building applications to support their everyday work, but also your full-time Power Platform developers that are often referred to as pro developers. And I hate that phrase because I always feel like that suggests that the citizen developers are not pros at what they do. So I try to use the phrase Power Platform developers. So nurturing the community is so important in this context. So what does it look like? Well, when we begin to adopt the platform, we always recommend that people begin with what we call the quick start. So here in the first couple of months, what you should be doing is you should be prototyping the first workload or the 4th workload, right? So get good at building these applications quickly and spinning out prototypes. ABC in a day training, so offer app in a day, dashboard in a day, Power Virtual Edge PVA in a day, whatever it might be, offer this training to your end users. Stakeholder working groups, this is about envisioning and designing and creating a roadmap and creating a vision for enterprise management and governance within the organization, and then planning and budgeting out like what it's going to cost, say, over the next 6 to 12 months to continue to adopt the platform. And as you move forward, you're going to be doing really 3 things. The first is building. So this is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. It's building solutions on the platform using the entirety of the tools available to you. The next is road mapping. So these are analyzing your candidate workloads, working with business groups to identify where their biggest problems are, helping them to prioritize what they're going to do with the platform. And then finally, enterprise management. And that's how do we deploy and manage and govern this thing at an enterprise scale rather than just kind of doing it in isolation. So if you want to reorder this into a more traditional kind of IT diagram here, this is really what this looks like. We quick start, and then we get into a continual cycle where enterprise management allows us to go out into the business and to roadmap with them and to build solutions, and then ultimately transition those solutions to whoever is going to be supporting them long term. And if we're doing this across business groups or countries or regions, right, the idea is to establish that enterprise management at the base level, right? So to establish the platform and to manage and govern it and secure it, and then to allow different business groups, and they could be by country, they could be by product line, they could be by region, however you define business groups in your organization, then to allow them to adopt the platform at their own pace, right? So we've created shared services that control costs and promote consistency. Everyone can adopt the platform at their own pace, and as we go, we can look for opportunities to share resources and to to economize on costs and effort where possible. So as we round out the adoption framework, and we'll get into some specific best practices, I do just want to share, I mentioned there are 7 themes, things we're working on. So here's what you can expect to see in the framework over the next, the rest of this year, I would say. So first and foremost, it's integration of Teams and Project Oakdale and Power Platform itself. We also really want to focus on how the platform fits into an organization's broader technology ecosystem. What are the adoption drivers? Like, why are we doing this? What's the value? Why is that important? How to make good technology choices across the 3 clouds? How to decide, hey, this should go to SharePoint, or this should go to a service inside of Azure, or this should go to Power Apps and Power Automate, etc. Techniques and best practices for architecting repeatable and reusable solutions. We don't want people to have to reinvent this every time. And then hopefully everyone can hear me. Someone is trying to ring me on Teams here. I apologize. Okay. Microsoft partners, yep. And then this idea that adoption is a continual process. So as far as progress, we've basically we're 13% of the way done with these goals, and we've got 13% are kind of in progress. So we're still kind of at the beginning of the second half of the year and what we're trying to achieve, but this is what we are working on. All right, so let's see. I apologize, I'm shutting down my Teams. Okay. So as we think about enterprise management, and as you go out into your organizations, or if you're a consultant, if you're going out and you're a partner, you're working with your clients, there's really 5 pillars of enterprise management, things that we need to account for on the platform. The first is platform management, right? What tooling are we using to manage the platform itself? Are we deploying the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, using the Power Platform Admin Center? How do we do that? What does our backlog look like? It's management, kind of bread and butter IT on the platform. Next, we've got enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture we'll talk actually a lot about here the rest of the time, but this is how do we use environments within our tenant? How do we secure, and how do we structure those to enable the rest of the platform? And how do we fit into the organization's data ecosystem? Application lifecycle management, this is really about developing solutions. Who's developing those solutions? What standards and best practices are they following? And how do we manage our source control and our deployment pipeline, our ALM pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got mature security model. This is not just about using the security tooling inside of the platform to secure our applications and our data, but this is also about completing whatever sort of regulatory requirements. If you're subject to, say in financial services, and you're subject to regulatory requirements with your data, or if you've got internal controls and sort of wickets or gates that you have to go through in order to stand up new technology in your organization. And then finally, my favorite, this is user empowerment. This is about creating user groups within the organization and really empowering your citizen developers to go out and build beautiful and useful things. All right, so next, ownership of the platform is very important. Who's the product owner? Who's going to own this within the organization? So what we have are generally some complementary or competing interests in IT, business, and your internal community of users. And what the model here is, and what we recommend, is that you establish basically what would be your center of excellence, who focuses on what you see here. I'm not going to read the slide to you. Virgin Atlantic called this organization IT Light, but it's a very sort of nimble, agile, kind of ninja cell of people, right, who possess expertise in the platform, and they are supporting the platform long term. So you'll hear a lot about the center of excellence model. There's a ton of guidance out there from Microsoft. We reference it in the adoption framework. Manuela is one of the product owners for that at Microsoft. So there's a ton of information out here. But the center of excellence, what does the center of excellence do? Well, the center of excellence is really concerned with three things: administration and governance, nurturing the community, and then supporting and operating the platform, including ALM, including application lifecycle management. And there's a number of types of requests or asks that we receive in the typical center of excellence setup. Here they are. You can see some of them. I'm really big on environment health, not just with trials, but across the entire platform, and also the ALM support regarding applications. But the fact is that these are the types of things that that center of excellence is set up to manage. And we've got tooling around it as well. So we've got the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. This is an evolving set of tools from Microsoft. Go grab these, deploy them into your environment. There's great instructions on how to do that. And you can use these to manage the platform itself. It's sort of a it's like a self-licking ice cream cone, in that we're actually using components on Power Platform. You see a Power App and a Power BI dashboard. We're using Power Platform to manage Power Platform, which is really great. So that there is my first best practice recommendation, right? Establish the center of excellence, deploy the COE starter kit. Remember, though, that starter is a really important word here. The COE starter kit does not equal COE, and it does not equal governance. It does not equal management. It is a starting point. It is designed to be modified and bent to the will of the organization. So if you are deploying it, just keep in mind that you're going to want to carefully consider how best to use it, and not consider it to be the end all be all. And if you've got questions about that, we can talk about that. Excuse me, next best practice is to think about segmenting workloads, solutions, applications that you build on the platform. Segment them and segment your environments within the tenant by criticality. So we've got a model for this. The first is that we've got critical workloads. So these are really mission critical to the organization. They're high in complexity. Maybe the entire organization is using them. If that is the case, we really recommend that IT directly owns support for these critical applications, and that you employ an actual ALM process, and that you just keep in mind that the deployment cycle on these mission critical applications is going to be longer than, say, with other applications. So I had someone who asked me if we could, wanted us to rebuild their entire human resources application, and they wanted it done in a week, and they heard that Power Apps was easy and any idiot could do it. And I had to explain that, listen, here, low code does not equal low complexity. We can build very complex apps to meet the needs of very complex business activities, but it doesn't mean we can do it in a week or in a couple days. Those are your critical applications. Next, we've got important. So they kind of move down the criticality spectrum. Oftentimes they're scoped to a business unit, so they might not be used organization-wide, but they're used very heavily by, say, one or a couple of business units. In general, we recommend that these at the very least be blessed by IT, right? So you might, IT might certify and say, this is a citizen developer who we are comfortable with building important applications, or they might review the application directly, but they might not support the application directly on a day in, day out basis. These generally we recommend an automated ALM process here. but there are some caveats to that, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And then the productivity grade applications. So these are the productivity workloads. They're generally built by citizen developers. They're directly supported by whoever built them. You're not going to have a lot of heavy support for those applications. IT is not generally going to support them themselves, and they're going to be built very, very quickly. So often less than 2 weeks, but they're going to be highly iterative. So they're going to be changing a lot as the needs of the application develop. And what we're able to do, because we've set up this spectrum of this criticality spectrum for our workloads, we're able to design and architect our environments inside the tenant around this. And we've actually updated this to account for Project Oakdale and quote unquote DataFlex for teams. So on one spectrum, think that you've got centralized responsibility. So at the bottom, it's less centralized, and at the top, it's more centralized. And then you've got that criticality of workload, that spectrum that I just shared with you. So within this framework, within this model, we really have 4 tiers of application support. One is that the environment and the applications living inside of it are managed by central IT. The next down is that they're managed by a business group. Next, we've got team environments. So these are the applications that via Project Oakdale live inside of Microsoft Teams, and they are managed on behalf of, they're managed by the team, and they're managed, as the team. And then finally, localized productivity environments. These are or localized productivity applications. These are applications that are built by an individual for them or for their small team or whatever. We then can start to layer these environments inside of the tiers, right? So we've got critical environments and important environments and the solutions that live inside of them that are managed by central IT. And you can see I've got a stack there, so that indicates that there's a proper ALM pipeline, say dev, test, prod at a minimum, and automated if you possibly can using Azure DevOps, but it is possible to manually manage these deployments as well. Then you've got the tier that's managed by the business group, right? So you've got your important applications that might be managed by a business group, but then the business group might also have an environment for productivity applications. There's not usually ALM in this case. There's usually these applications are built in place. Then we've got important and productivity environments at the team level. This is a difference, right, between DataFlex or between Project Oakdale and the Common Data Service, right, is that Common Data Service introduces the ability to create these automated ALM pipelines, right? So it's just a single important environment, but you might have a team environment where you are running applications that you say you've got a team in Teams for an entire business group, and you're building applications there that kind of rise to that level of importance. And then finally, our localized productivity environment. Every tenant in Power, or every 365 tenant running Power Platform will come with an environment called defaults. That default environment, we really recommend that you rename it to be called productivity applications. There's a running joke amongst many of us that says what we really should do is rename the default environment and call it apps to be deleted and see how people handle that. But so far, I don't know if anyone's done that. We overlay those criteria that I discussed earlier for impact, complexity, and scope. And from this, we can sort of divine a data storage best practice, right? Like where should data be stored generally based on the criticality of the application. Though I do caveat and say that Teams environments really only permit data storage inside of the Project Oakdale. You can't, for example, have a team environment and be storing your data, say, in Azure SQL, for example. So that's our environmental architecture model. Next best practice. So we look at security on the platform. How do we secure this? We can really secure it at 3 levels. The first is tenant level. So this is really important. Power Platform lives inside of your 365 tenant, and we authenticate to Power Platform using what you're already doing in Azure Active Directory. And there's a lot of capability there, particularly when we're dealing with external users and what we can use in terms of like Azure B2C to authenticate for say portal users outside of your organization. But fundamentally, you're going to authenticate to Power Platform using your tenant credentials. And we also, at the tenant level, we manage users and license control and that type of thing. The next is at the platform level. So at the Power Platform level, where we can limit or monitor the creation of environments. So we can create a ton of environments inside of the tenant. Think of an environment as like a dev box, right? Like in the old days, or a production environment or a test environment. They all live inside of the tenant, and we can control that. We can control access to individual environments. We can employ what we call data loss prevention, or DLP policies. So DLP policies basically create parameters around security of those data connectors that I mentioned earlier. So you effectively can't say grab data out of SharePoint or data out of CDS and post it to Twitter. That's a stupid extreme example, but you can't do that if you're using DLP policies correctly. And we can also limit which external data connectors are available for use. And then finally, when we develop apps themselves, we can share the apps with users or groups. We can use security roles, at least if we're using CDS, we can use those security roles to limit access. And we can actually get very granular down to the field level using what we call field security profiles. Again, that's a CDS capability, not something that's available across the platform, but that's how we can secure at the app level. I'll round out the discussion by talking about, just sharing our thinking on a really important topic, and that's who is a citizen developer? What does that mean? So citizen developers are generally building applications for their own use, or maybe for their team, or they've got they're an expert in a specific business function. They're an accountant and they know accounting, and they're building an application to help them do their job. If you're looking for a citizen developer, what's a good candidate? I always say that a great candidate for citizen developers are people who are known to have strong opinions and cause trouble in a good way, right? Like, they're always the ones who are saying, this is stupid. Why are we doing it this way? I'm going to go build a solution on my own. Power Platform lets us really empower those people to build their own tools inside of a platform that is managed and governed. So really to do it in a safe way. But the line really is, if IT or software is your full-time job. So citizen developers, in our thinking, really, they are people who are using the technology in support of another business function. They're an accountant, or they're a bus driver, or they're a security guard, or whatever it might be. Then we've got our Power Platform developers. Those are the full-time folks. Probably a lot of people on this call, they might not be working on Power Platform full-time. They might be a SharePoint developer or a .NET developer or whatever, but they have some set of these Power Platform skills. And the platform at this point has really grown too large for one person to be an expert on all of it. So if anyone ever tells you that they are an expert on Power Platform all up, that is just categorically false, right? I come from a Dynamics and a Common Data Service background, right? But I build absolutely, utterly terrible Canvas apps. So don't ever let someone tell you that they're an expert on everything, because the platform is enormous and they simply aren't. But then within that context, we do have kind of a traditional thinking of how someone progresses in their career. So no one is going to be an expert on doing all the things in Power Platform on day one. I think that earlier on there was a misconception, right, that Power Platform low code meant that, like I said earlier, any idiot could do it, and that is just simply not true. So keep in mind that a boot camp does not a solution architect make. With that, I think we're actually right on time here. I will just remind everyone about the adoption framework on GitHub. We'd love to know what your ideas and best practices are. So please join us there, and please contribute. And I will finally share some resources here that you can refer back to. So obviously, what your strategic framework is for the platform, that's the adoption framework. Microsoft has published their admin and governance white paper. Do consult that. Deploy the COE starter kit. We offer a training called Admin in a Day. Admin in a Day introduces people to the management and governance and security tooling around the platform, and then finally you can get the the latest from Microsoft there. So with that, these resources are great. I will post this entire presentation on my website. That's that giant QR code, runwayview.com. But definitely connect with me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. So that's it for me. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you, though.
Thanks for a great presentation, Andrew. So now we'll have the question and answers part. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free to type them into the question window now. We have two in for you already, Andrew. So the first one is, can you give some examples of when a data source would be preferable, when one data source would be preferable to use over another?
Yeah, for sure. What I will do is, let me refer back to this slide here. So we're talking about the services that exist in this data layer here. So I think that in general, the things you should be thinking about choosing, and we can mix and match and consolidate these as well. But in general, when you're thinking about where to store your data, this is one of the first things you should be thinking about. And a lot of it has to do with what capability the data source offers, what kind of capacity the data source offers, and then finally, where your data already exists, and where your data already exists and where you've already made the investment, right? So my recommendation to everyone is, when you think about Power Platform, you should think Common Data Service first. It is the native data service to the platform, and it offers a ton of capability. And the organizations that have really invested heavily, because a lot of times you have comments like, oh, well, the licensing is expensive. It is the most expensive of the data sources, but the organizations that have invested heavily, we're talking tens or even hundreds of thousands of licenses, have really done the math on this, and they've determined they can get a ton of value. However, there are often cases where you want to use a different data service. So Azure SQL, for example, if you've already got a big investment in storing your data in Azure SQL, or you've got other applications outside of the platform that are relying on what you have living inside of Azure SQL, you might want to connect your Power Platform, your extensibility layer components, you might want to connect that directly to Azure SQL. Similarly with the Project Oakdale capability, which is coming in September, so this is a little bit forward-looking. That's a great data source for productivity or important applications that are built by citizen developers inside of teams. SharePoint is another great data source for those for those citizen developers. You can spin up a SharePoint site or a Microsoft list very quickly, particularly if you've already invested heavily in governance around SharePoint, and SharePoint is something that you feel really confident in having managed. And then finally, with the data connectors, you might want to choose if that data lives in an external source that you do not control. So you might be connecting to a third-party data source, and you're never going to be able to bring LinkedIn data, or you're never going to be able to bring, say, geospatial data. Or I know that the World Health Organization, the WHO, has published just has excellent data around COVID-19. That data you're never going to bring into your own you're never going to bring it in-house. You're never going to bring it into your own data store, whether it's SharePoint, Oakdale, CDS, or Azure. So you're using data connectors to connect to that external source. But what I will say is that it is very, very important that you do as much data work, as much calculating and compiling and mashing up, that you do it in the data layer rather than architecting your application so that at runtime your app is like trying to tap into 13 different data sources and do a lot of calculation there in the app at runtime. You're going to have huge performance issues. So use the data layer to do as much of the heavy lifting behind the scenes as possible. So hopefully that was useful as an answer to the question, but thank you.
And then someone else said, what about performance? We have tried Flow, but we have to go away from Flow as it's taking a long time to run a simple workflow.
Yeah. So, so, so my question back, and if you can reply in the chat or something, is, are we talking about like the workflow isn't like the workflow isn't synchronous, like it's an asynchronous workflow, so it doesn't happen instantly, or are we having really significant timing? I mean, is the runtime very long? I'll try to answer both. First of all, flow, your Power Automate and building those flows, those are great for asynchronous workflows. Power Automate and flow, those flows are not truly synchronous. This is a gap in the product. CDS has what we call classic workflows, or CDS classic workflows built into CDS. Those workflows do run synchronously. So if you need to run synchronous workflows, you do still, technically speaking, need to be using those CDS workflows. I loved those. They die, old habits die hard with me. I'm trying to really transition to Flow, because the fact is that even the async workflows inside of Flow, even those workflows, they should be happening very quickly, right? So a lot of the things that I used to think, yeah, no, I need this to be synchronous. The fact is that I'm using Flow for it now, and it happens within a few seconds. If you're having long-running workflow, or you're having long-running flows, that could very well be, an issue of having a inefficiently designed flow. It's hard to say without looking at it, but what I can promise you is that that most of these flows do run pretty quickly. There are two people I would recommend you consult on this. Look them up on Twitter. One is Daniel Laskowitz. Daniel is he's in the Netherlands. He's very, very brilliant when it comes to Power Automate. And the other is Yash Agarwal. Yash Agarwal is in Hyderabad, India. And Yash keeps a great blog. He's one of the world's leading Power Automate experts. He's someone else I would consult, because those are two of my favorite experts on that topic. So get with them and see if they can help you, or maybe they publish something that can point you in the right direction, but you shouldn't be experiencing that problem.
And then someone also asked, CDS can also run from SharePoint, ?
So CDS, CDS is a different service from SharePoint. You can keep data in CDS, or you can keep data, say, in a SharePoint list. What you can also do is you can say, keep your data in CDS, and you can build a Canvas app on top of that data, for example, that lives in CDS, and you can embed the application into a page in SharePoint. Say that SharePoint powers your intranet, and you want to embed the application right there into SharePoint. So yeah, there's different permutations of that. You can also mix and match. You don't have to build an application that just uses one or the other data source. If you've got some in SharePoint and some in CDS, you can store, say, files or documents in SharePoint and then surface them through applications built on top of CDS. There's any number of ways that you can integrate the two. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not like, I have a very strong preference for CDS as a data source. It's what I know, and it's what I have a lot of faith in. But there are absolutely plenty of scenarios where you want to be using both CDS and SharePoint, because they are both really good at different things. So yes, we could spend hours exploring all of those scenarios, but yeah, you use them both in concert for what they are good at.
Okay, we'll have one more question. They said, can I connect a SharePoint list to a CDS data source?
You can build, that's some more context on that question. That's a little bit hard. Like, I would ask what you're trying to achieve there. But yes, you could go get data out of SharePoint and bring it into CDS. You could, in theory, get data out of CDS and push it into SharePoint. SharePoint has more limitations on the structure of the data because SharePoint is not a true relational database. So if you've got really complex data in the CDS, it might not work very cleanly pushing it into SharePoint, but you can absolutely grab data out of SharePoint and bring it into CDS. What I would be using for that, I would be using Power Automate to do that. You could build a flow that, say, copies or moves data from one to the other. And you might look at data flows as well. I do not know, I could look it up. I don't recall if data flows support SharePoint, mostly because I've just never built one that integrates with SharePoint. I've never built one personally, but I think data flows probably, I would be shocked if they don't support SharePoint. So you could use data flows inside the platform as well.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's it now. Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time today to complete this webinar with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Bye. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Join us next week for calling APIs, consuming services, and exposing data using Power Automate. Thanks again to Andrew and all those who attended today. Take care. Goodbye.